Hey guys, today our objectives are to differentiate between genotype and phenotype, as well as to differentiate between homozygous and heterozygous. First, to begin with, genotype versus phenotype. In order to know about genotype and phenotype and the differences between them, let us recall together what we have started in the previous session. In the previous session, we were talking about the differences between somatic cells and sex cells, where we have said that somatic cells are the cells that containing 46 chromosomes, in other words, 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes. Why we are saying homologous chromosomes? Because from each kind of chromosomes, we have two chromosomes, one taken from the father, one from the mother. If I'm going to suppose that chromosome number 15, as I have here, if you're going to consider that these two chromosomes are pair of chromosome 15, meaning I have inherited one chromosome 15 from the father and another one chromosome 15 from the mother. Why do we call these two chromosomes as homologous? Why we don't call them as identical chromosomes? Actually, homologous chromosomes are called like that because they are identical in everything except in one thing. Let us see what are the common things between homologous chromosomes. Actually, homologous chromosomes, they have the same size, the same shape, the same position of centromere, as well as they have the same partitions, that is the number of genes, and these genes are arranged in the same way, as well as these genes are responsible for the same trait. If I'm going to consider here on chromosome number 15, gene number 2, if you're going to consider it as responsible for the color of eye, and gene number 5 is responsible for the earlobe. Here in both genes 2 of both chromosome 15, here this gene is responsible for the color of eyes. Now, what is the difference between these two homologous chromosomes? Actually, the difference is going to be by the alleles. Where if I'm going to consider for the color of eyes, I have two different alleles in nature. We have mentioned that before, that for each trait we have at least two different alleles. For the color of eyes, we have two different alleles, which are brown and blue. For gene 5, which I consider it as responsible for earlobe as a trait, we have two different alleles, free and attached. Now, what I carry here in these two genes of chromosome number 15 on gene number 2. Maybe I'm going to have two alleles brown. That is, I have inherited one brown allele from my father and one brown allele from my mother. Or maybe I have inherited two blue alleles, meaning one blue allele from the mother, one blue allele from the father. Or maybe I have inherited two different alleles, one brown and the other blue. So here is going to be the difference between these two homologous chromosomes. Since they are going, in this case, having different information, different allele, okay, so they are not identical at all. Okay. Now we're going to talk what you mean by genotype and phenotype. What is a genotype? Genotype refers to the exact pairing of alleles for a certain trait on my homologous chromosomes. If I'm going to consider again the trait earlobe, which has two different alleles, free and attached. Here, in order to determine the genotype of a certain individual for this trait, it's very important to give a symbol first for each allele. Here for the free allele, I'm going to represent it with capital F. Why capital F? I take the first letter from the word, and if it's dominant, I'm going to represent it as capital letter. where attached, I'm going also to take the first letter A, but since it's recessive, it's going to be represented or symbolized or designated by small a. How could we know whether a certain allele is dominant or recessive? This is given for us, or sometimes in some cases we have to discover it by ourselves. Later I'm going to teach you how to determine whether a certain allele is dominant or recessive. But if you remember from the previous session, we said that free is dominant over attached. For that reason, I symbolized the alleles like this: capital F for free, small a for attached. In our example, if I'm going to take again the three individuals, Hadi, Sarah, and Noor, that I mentioned in the previous session as examples for the earlobe. Okay, we have noticed that Hadi has two free alleles. So now I can represent the free ear allele by capital F. So Hadi has two F alleles, F and F, where Sarah is going to have small a, because previously we have mentioned that Sarah has two attached alleles, one taken from the mother, another from the father, where Noor has two different alleles for this trait, F and A, F for free again and A for attached. So how to determine the genotype of Hadi, of Sarah, and for Noor? This is a question which is going to be asked. Since Hadi has two F allele, so his genotype is going to be FF. Sarah is going to have a genotype small a, where Noor is going to have two alleles F and A as genotype. So pay attention again, focus on this point, that genotype is always represented by two letters. These two letters may be the same, or maybe they may be different. Okay, this is about genotype. What's about phenotype? Phenotype refers to the expression of the trait in the individual. Yani how I see this trait in this individual. For example, for the earlobe, here I have two individuals, one having attached earlobe, the other has free earlobe. So the phenotype of the first individual for this trait, how I see it, he has attached. So the phenotype of this individual is attached earlobe. I write it as words. How I see it, how it appears, how it's expressed. I can determine the phenotype of the outer appearance of certain individual for all his physical traits, the outer appearance traits. For this other individual, I have free earlobe, so his phenotype is free earlobe. Again, if I'm going to take as an example here Hadi, Sarah, and Noor. Hadi has two alleles F and F. Last time we determined that since F is dominant, anyway we have two F alleles, so actually he's going to have a free earlobe and nothing else. Sarah is going to have attached earlobe. Noor has two alleles, F and A, her genotype FA, but what is her phenotype? Since free is dominant over attached, so Noor phenotype is going to be free earlobe. So here I determine the phenotype of Hadi, Sarah, and Noor, and I can write it like this: free earlobe, attached earlobe, again Noor, free earlobe. This is about genotype and phenotype. So we can say that a genotype is the real genes or alleles carried on the genes on the homologous chromosome for this individual, whereas the phenotype, how this trait appears expressed in this individual. Now, let us see what is the difference between homozygous and heterozygous. For any trait in any individual, we have to determine whether this individual has homozygous genotype or heterozygous genotype. What is a homozygous genotype? Homozygous is when the two alleles in the genotype are the same, where heterozygous is when the two alleles in the genotypes are different. In our example about the earlobe, if an individual has genotype FF, so he has two similar alleles, F and F, so he has homozygous genotype. If he has AA, again he has two similar or identical alleles, AA, so he has homozygous genotype. Whereas if we have, or if certain individual has two different alleles for this trait, for example FA, so he is heterozygous, or he has heterozygous genotype. Also homozygous, usually we express it as pure since the two alleles are the same. Also, instead of heterozygous, we can say that he is hybrid for this trait since he has two different alleles, so he is hybrid. What's about our example? For example, Hadi has FF genotype, Sarah has AA genotype. So both Hadi and Sarah are homozygote. That is, they have homozygous genotype. Homozygous genotype since the two alleles in their chromosomes or in their genes are the same. I can say they are homozygote. Homozygote when I'm going to describe the individual. I say that Hadi is homozygote since he has homozygous genotype. What's about Noor? Noor has genotype FA, so her genotype is heterozygous, so Noor is heterozygote, or she is hybrid. This is everything about today. See you later in order to have more examples about this issue.